Hello and welcome to Donkey Creek. It's a beautiful afternoon in November and I'm at the park under the bridge, kind of between the Austin Estuary Park, which has a brand new name that I'm still working on pronouncing, and I'm not going to try to do that in this moment, but we're going to get it down and we're going to be great at it very soon. But between Austin Estuary Park and Donkey Creek Park, under the bridge, Salmon Observation Station is installed. And if you've stopped by and there hasn't been a data book, it has been returned. So you can now add your observations about the salmon you see in the creek. Speaking of which, we're gonna flip this around and take a peek. So the chum salmon have absolutely begun their return back to this freshwater stream. It leads out into Gig Harbor Bay. You can see the Harbor History Museum for a sense of place. I'm noticing some ripples and I'm gonna see if we can find a fish that's swimming by. The idea of the Salmon Observation Station is to get a good idea of when the best time to come view salmon is, and really it's in the fall when they're swimming back. And so I can definitely spy a dead fish, which for those of you who I've seen notes in the book that are like, oh, what's with all the dead salmon in the creek? This seems terrible. It is part of their life cycle. So these are fish that have, hatched from this creek, gone out of the freshwater habitat, through the estuary, into the ocean, have spent some time getting nice and big and strong, and then have made their way back to their home water stream through a series of really cool adaptations that I don't think humans totally understand. Boom, look at that live fish swimming across the dead one. That nice dark purple bar lets me know that is indeed a chum salmon, and then there's a second one just swimming underneath. I'm noticing their bodies are kind of looking rough. So kind of the one closest with that white on the tail. As these fish return to the fresh water, they only make the change from freshwater to saltwater really well once. And then as they come back from saltwater to freshwater, that freshwater doesn't treat them very nice. And so all of their energy is going to spawning and then dying. And so we kind of can see what we like to call the zombie fish at points. I'm gonna sneak around these trees to get back to viewing this nice pair of fish here, potentially courting each other, saying, hey, how you doing? Would you like to pass on your genes with me? Yeah, so great to see these fish returning back. But yeah, that fresh water is going to kind of deteriorate their bodies. You'll notice when salmon do return to freshwater habitats, they undergo some pretty spectacular changes. They swap from that nice silver ocean phase to their spawning phase. And the different species of salmon all have kind of different varieties of colorations. The chum, as we see here, get this kind of olivey green and purple striping. The sockeye salmon are classic with that bright red and green coloration. And there's, of course, our 7 salmonids, which are animals, fish particularly, that go from freshwater to saltwater, back to freshwater. And chum, if we take our hand out, I like to remember thumb is for chum. You can point to your sock or your eye for sockeye salmon. Tallest finger on your hand is the king of all the salmon. You might wear silver on your ring finger for silver salmon, and your pinky can remind you pink salmon. And then if you want to clunk on your head, you have steelhead and cutthroat for all 7 salmonid species that do, again, that freshwater, saltwater, freshwater part of a life cycle, which is really unique. There's not a lot of species that can do that transition. And so because salmon are so cool, they're a species that really unites all of these habitats from, our freshwater to estuary to ocean. They're a incredible connector species. we like to celebrate them, and their return reminds us of that incredible journey and just how important they are, not just to the ecosystem, but to different cultures, as well as, economies. So people who like to eat salmon, they really just are an all-around stellar fish. And if we can protect salmon, we can protect all these different habitats. And so again, we are out here on this lovely day. If you want to let me know where you're tuning in from, we'd love to know. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the Salmon Observation Station, which we install every year underneath Donkey Creek, or underneath the bridge at Donkey Creek. You can just come on by at any time, take a peek in this nice repurposed Costco wine box. We did that a couple years ago with a friend named Aaron, a talented woodworker, really did a great job putting this together, and then letting me have at it with what is the burning wood thing to get our logo going. But you'll see that we have the instructions for this community science adventure. Really, all we're doing is using kind of the bridge as our designated zone. And so we want you to time yourself and however long you're making observations. And I want you to count the number of fish that you see swimming beneath the bridge. And that can help us, get a little snapshot of when a good time to view salmon in the creek might be. So we saw those 2 fish earlier. You're also, of course, welcome to write any other additional observations. I know in the past people have counted the number of dead fish they've seen in the creek, as well as the number of live fish they've seen further up, closer to the box culvert that is at the other end. And so generally we want those salmon counts to be specifically the salmon that you see crossing under the bridge, but we're also curious to know more about that too. And so once you're done making those observations, you can come on over to the Salmon Observation Station and awkwardly one-handedly in our handy dandy notebook, woohoo, take a look. And you got to flip through because we have a couple years worth of data in this thing. So don't take my notebook, please. Okay. This is difficult to do one-handed. All right. So starting in the 2021 zone, you're going to write the date of your visit, the start time of your observations. When you end your observations, write your end time, the total number of live salmon you observed, and then of course write your name and any other notes you might have. If you're a student, we want to know that for our grant recording purposes, so please put a little star next to your name. It's really as simple as that to contribute to this lovely little community science endeavor here at Donkey Creek. And if you forget any of those instructions, you can kind of come back here. I will say, I'm not putting this part of it out. You just have to imagine a line under the bridge. But generally, that's the same idea. So, with that, come by the creek. The salmon are back. They're here. They're looking pretty good right now. I know they tend to get a little rougher looking, and we see a lot more dead ones as we get closer to the end of November and into the beginning of December. I'm noticing this ripple coming through. One thing we want to kind of correlate with our data is the high tide and the low tide. I know sometimes with a nice high tide, the water in this creek actually fills up. I can tell it's a fairly high tide right now because the water level is higher. But as that tide goes out, you really only have a small amount of fresh water streaming out, which makes it really easy to see the salmon that are there. But that also makes it more difficult for those fish to return because there's not a lot of water flowing. And so, yeah, we're just kind of curious to see that. And of course, our current trends are you see them during the day because not a lot of people are making observations at night. And that's okay. But, kind of playing with that data it's been fun to see those trends. And one other thing with the higher high tides especially when we get a lot of rain. All the tannins, kind of like imagine the leaves falling into the water as like the tea leaves, and the pigments get released from that. And so sometimes we can look into the creek and I wouldn't even be able to see the bottom. Right now, for whatever reason, the water is looking fairly clear, which let us see those 2 fish swimming around at the beginning of this video. But yeah, not seeing any fish at the moment in this part of the creek. So let's go ahead and take a walk and just look up a little further. If you've never been to Donkey Creek before, again, come on by, add some salmon observations to our station. But definitely walking along the trail, I highly recommend it. It's a pretty easy, low sloping walk, and it has these nice guardrails so you can just lean over, take a peek. Again, there's that nice looking dead fish there. Hopefully that is a successful spawning member of the salmon community returning to this creek. It is a little tragic, their life cycle. They spawn and they die, but I like to remember this is the fish that dies for love, people. It's a beautiful thing. And their bodies are actually going to help the riparian zone. So we have these beautiful tall trees that are further enhanced by the nutrients from these fish. They bring all that ocean nutrients back, and here's some ready to carry on. Hopefully you can see they blend in pretty well with that creek environment. Looks like I know they can swim under that log, so this little snag here isn't a total barrier for them. So there they are. Okay, I'm not fast enough on the camera work to catch that fish for you. But we'll keep walking a little bit. But yeah, the fish that die for love, their bodies help fertilize in a way the surrounding habitat, which we would call the riparian zone. Those are kind of the plants that are in that transition area between the water as well as the land. So I don't know if you can see this pair swimming here, cruising up to the creek to find a suitable spot to lay their eggs. When they do find a nice spot, which I hope they go a little further, just knowing that this spot gets a little bit inundated by the tide. We're still pretty close to the mouth of Gig Harbor, so cruise on up a little further. But these fish, they'll lay on their side and they'll kick their tail to make a little depression, and that will serve as the salmon nest, which is called a redd, R-E-D-D. And they'll lay thousands of eggs there that will get fertilized by sometimes a couple different males. The female can lay multiple redds in a creek. I'm gonna keep walking along our trail here, following the path up to the viewing platform so we can keep talking salmon life cycle. But yeah, those eggs will hatch in the early spring, and those little baby salmon will spend the first part of their life buried in the gravel as a little alvin. Nice big yolk sac for them to have all the nutrients they need to get bigger and stronger. Once that's used up, there'll be the fry, and those little fry will then, spend some time in the creek eating bugs, getting strong, and once it's time to go, they will do smoltification. So they'll be ready to head out to the estuary where they can handle some of that salt water. I'm gonna pause there because we've got some commotion. Yeah, lots of fish today, friends, and it's beautiful, so come on by the creek. But those little smolt will, they're heading out to the ocean. They can handle the salt water. Their livers change, their scales get bigger, their tail gets more forked. They're ready to adapt to a new water system life, heading out to the ocean to become a nice big healthy adult, assuming they don't get eaten by predators along the way. And then when it's time to come back, that's when we get this beautiful spawning phase. That is what we're seeing in the creek today. And different species that we mentioned before kind of have different life spans. So some, they do this on a 2-year cycle. Others can go up to 7 years before they're coming back to the home stream. Chum are kind of average in that number, so 3 to 5 years. You might notice across the way the remote site incubator. This hasn't been in use the last couple of years, but this is a place where we can kind of humans add to the fish population. So we are curious to see if those salmon numbers change. We're kind of getting to a point where we might see the impacts of not using the remote site incubator. So right now I'm delighted to see so many fish, despite maybe having a year where the remote site incubator didn't contribute to more numbers. So yeah, lots of kind of curious wonders we can have about that. But I'm seeing some live fish, seeing some dead fish. It's looking pretty good. And yeah, yay salmon. Looking around. All right, well, that's that for this little peek in the creek. Again, I highly recommend that if you haven't come by Gig Harbor, taking a walk along Donkey Creek is definitely something fun to do. Rain or shine, the fish will be returning, and it's exciting to see them and celebrate their amazing journey as they complete the rest of their life cycle. So thank you all for tuning in. I see there's Mary's here, and Wyatt, and Dave, Randy, Dana. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see your names in that salmon observation station soon. So cheers.